I just want to welcome everyone who has joined us for this session. This is the first official session in the Talks program connected to the Turbine Art Fair for 2021. My name is James Say. I curated the Talks program this year. We did have a kind of preemptive test run a couple of weeks ago discussing the Art Awards landscape in South Africa. We're focused today on the extraordinary synchronicity of having a lot of the major art institutions in the country sharing significant birthdays in the same year. Without further ado, we have a range of those institutions with us tonight. We are discussing a little bit of the history of each art organization. We've got different types of organizations represented, from galleries to print workshops to studio organizations, and educational organizations also. So we want to get a little bit of a scene setter, if you like, on the background to all of the histories involved, highlights, lowlights, and anecdotes from these illustrious histories from the Goodman Gallery, the Artists Press, and Artists Press Studio, and the Bag Factory Studio Complex as well are all with us tonight. So we look forward to all that. How things are going to work, we'll go around the room. Each representative of each organization will give us a little bit of a picture and fill it in colorfully, I'm hoping. Giving a little bit of detail about the history and some anecdotes and some indication of the roller coaster ride it's been for everyone. And we'll do that one by one, about 10 to 15 minutes each for our hour-and-a-half session. And we'll then have an open Q&A for all of our attendees. Please put any questions in the chat as we go along, so that I can direct them to the relevant person or open them up for a general conversation at the end of the session. So thanks for everyone for making the time from all of the different organizations with us tonight. And I think let's kick off with the one who perhaps has formalized and certainly is the most senior of our attendees tonight, and that is the Goodman Gallery, represented here by Senior Curator Neil Dundas. Neil's been with the gallery, as he'll tell you, I have no doubt, since the early 1980s. So his pedigree is spotless, and he has seen a lot in that time. A lot about the South African art world and the international art world. So it'll be a pleasure to listen to some of Neil's colorful anecdotes. Just some background that everyone, including the Goodman, celebrated the milestones that they have achieved this year by putting on some kind of exhibition or some kind of commemorative show this year. And Neil was able to do that at the Goodman, a show called Lasting Influences, appropriately. And let's turn over to Neil.
Thank you very much, James, and I hope everybody can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Good. It's yes, it's been a really interesting journey. I do have to say, I think spotless might be a very dangerous claim to make for anyone's reputation in the art world. I think there are battles of wits and egos and of conflicting agendas and intelligences that people the background of our South African art world, but equally so in other countries. The kind of things one encounters right from the word go. So in 1982, rather unskilled in what I was about to plunge into, Linda Gibbon took a great chance on me. And in my interview, she actually, her almost parting shot was, the best thing about you is that you don't know enough for me to have to unteach you. I can make you do things my way. And I appreciated that because at the time it was at the instance of people like Walter Battis, who I had met as a professor emeritus, Bill Ainsley, who I knew from the Art Foundation, and a couple of other artists, because it had become an interest and a hobby of mine until I walked out of a job and then really gave it some fuller attention and then really required a job. And Linda was willing to give me that shot. So it's something I've never forgotten. And I think the Goodman Gallery already then, it was an intimidating experience to walk into something like that and begin working with a few people who had good experience and who hadn't studied law and languages as I had, but had really immersed themselves in the fine arts for years. But what really became very quickly obvious to me at that stage, going to summer schools, going to artist studios, reading and finding the textbooks and getting involved with every artist for their exhibitions. And this goes back to people like Cecil Scottness. I knew a little through my family in Cape Town. And that was one of the earliest shows. Walter himself, April 1982, it was his last show, and appropriately enough, something that was a great thrill for me to work on. And he died in the August of that year. And the privilege that really comes with working in the arts is meeting the very colorful people who are part of that world. And that can include, back at that stage too, Judith Mason Attwood, then as she styled herself, and later went back to her original surname. But they were top artists in the world of the arts, and I was really given quite an apprenticeship. Some of them, like Alan Crump a few years later, were not at all afraid to say to me, you should keep quiet a lot more and read a lot more before you have more to say. But I can help you with that. The clients and the world of people who made our business possible were remarkably different then from now, mainly because we still, despite the apartheid regime, we had a lot of interest out of academic departments, museums, and in some cases, some private patrons who were willing to fund the growth and continuation of our culture. And the gallery, and Pat came to the gallery actually fairly shortly after me. We started, I remember seeing a show of Pat's wonderful. For me, the roughness and the honesty of his wall sculpture made in wood. Some pieces beautifully worked and refined, and others left in the condition in which he found them, and assembled in a way that somehow spoke to somebody working on a desert island, or without all the paraphernalia of tech support, but still constructing and building things that aspired to be the maquette for something much larger. And that exhibition was in Fuba, which I'd gotten to know through doing some trustee and volunteer work with the Market Theatre's gallery. Pat's wife, Bongi, came along to work with me as a colleague, and also we were greatly fond of her work. And that was within 2 or 3 years of starting in the gallery. I think 85, Bongi joined, and we did a show with Pat in 86 and another groundbreaking show with Pat and David Korwani at the end of the 80s for the National Festival of the Arts. And what was interesting was how many people there were at that point who certainly were not well established yet. They may have had some reputation within South Africa, and of course some of them had prominent histories already from the 70s, going off and representing the country at biennales and festivals. But as the 80s went on and the states of emergency were declared, and many of our artists reacted very much against that in the visual language of resistance art, it was no longer possible. With the boycott and with the anti-apartheid movement, and it became a matter rather of very surreptitious and careful through some of the artists and the writers and the academics that we knew to build contact with the ANC Culture Desk in London, to work towards things like Africa 95 Festival and the Modern Oxford exhibition of the AAM, where works had been sent, many of them out through the border to Botswana. And Pat, I think your work for that and Bongi's arguably went with the good offices of Bill Ainsley, getting out to Gaborone in order to be sent to Amsterdam, where that exhibition began. And we had to negotiate through the offices of people like Wally Siroti, who was already then one of the intellectual giants of that new movement. So the learning curve was also about trying to be part of something which fostered the arts within the country. And we had a small but robust collector base, many of whom are still collecting today. It's greatly admirable to me that the South African art buying community has continued to try and bring the support needed. I was most encouraged last year when the first lockdown art initiatives began, and how many people responded and how many artists put up their works, and people were able to make some access to some help in living during the worst of times. But certainly there was a heyday of people with sufficient wealth and means and real interest in education coming to listen to an artist speak, meeting across color lines and culture lines, and sometimes across quite sharp differences of people that took place within the gallery setting, were incredibly important to us. We all started to realize that there was support within some of these official boards from museums and even the National Education Department. They were not going by the government letter at the time. And some marvelous work by the great Soweto sculptors of Sidney Khumalo and Isram Lechai, really quite tough and very obvious political statement works by people like Battis or Lucas van Vuren, David Korwani, found their ways into these official and semi-official collections, sometimes with the director or something saying quite quietly, look, don't put too much publicity out there yet. We'll get it past the trustees and then maybe we'll see something come out in the press. And the press themselves were there. And I think there was a sense of a unity amongst underground communities that believed they had to be there for one another, and that support was going to remain incredibly important, as people, and we all, I think, believed that a cataclysm was building. And then there was the miracle of a country that certainly managed at least the first stage. Nobody can say we've completed our necessary metamorphosis, but the country has certainly changed a great deal. In those years, many of those great artists with whom I was privileged to work to begin with people like Sydney and Isram, who became good friends and very sensible and sensitive advisors to me, saying, you need to learn more about understanding the position of the people who are working outside of the privileged community. And they have gone, and Robert Hodgins and Walter Battis and Alan Crump, for that matter, Colin Richards. I mean, I think there's a cascade of names of people who really established South African contemporary art, and who fostered the new way forward. A number of them really swiftly and joyfully transitioned to our newer country and have built wonderful careers since then. And of course, along the way, I recall all of you at some point, James writing criticism, Tamar and Mark making work and founding one of the most wonderful print facilities in the country, and beginning with their own studies and taking those things and that knowledge and away to White River and producing an environment where people could go and work with incredible focus. And with Pat and Bongi, with trying to foster the sorts of ties with the Alex Art Centre, with the Joburg Art Gallery, and the Bag Factory Studios, where many of our artists went through a period of renting a studio and working in a cooperative way that I think gave everyone a good communicative base, a way of being part of a movement without fostering an ism. Sadly for me, one of the biggest changes became that official support died away as money within the country became critical to be spent in the places where it could sustain life, improve life, and sustain a problematic young democracy. Official support and the funding, even in academics, has had to go towards, of course, making a wider education more available. The kind of patronage and sponsorship declined for a good long while, and it became necessary, I would say, for each of these organizations here represented tonight to take on as much of a kind of public-private partnership as they were able to do. And among the things that I always admired, Linda Gibbon, Lisa Esses, our new owner, or new, we laughingly sometimes say our new gallery, is the one on Jan Smuts Avenue, which opened in 1996 in October, which in fact will next month be 25 years. The gallery has had 55 years of existence. And sometimes these things seem impossible because the time has dissolved and evaporated so quickly, and yet such a rich history has been gone through. But Linda and Lisa have sponsored students who really showed promise and taken on artists at a young age that they've been able to try and build alongside the international careers of some who had already really found their way and paid their dues. It was great that for a number of years, when South Africa was invited by Cuba to be part of the Havana Biennale, but it had to happen outside the boycott. And so it had to be, and Linda was willing to say, okay, I will choose artists and submit. You can tell us whether you believe they're relevant to what you're doing. We will get approval from somebody within the shadow governmental structures outside the country, and then I will pay for those works to come. And at first she said to me after the end of the first time at the Havana Biennale, we must be crazy, and I must be mad. Will anyone even take notice? And half the Western world doesn't go there. But it all became part of fostering a good basis, and in some cases, a new basis for growing an international career for those artists. And certainly it became a case with some of the big museums, the National Gallery, the Johannesburg Art Gallery, and some of the academic galleries at university campuses. They could not afford to continue their purchasing, their acquisitions programs, because their official funding dried up. But we saw, even with Albie Sachs and the Constitutional Court, a lot of generosity out of the private sector and out of those organizations that were already successful to try and continue that tradition of finding newer work and newer voices a way to become part of the big collections. So, and then of course we have come to a time now where we have seen amazing new museological ventures and museums with collections like the Normal Foundation and the Zuidsmoker in Cape Town, the Johannesburg Contemporary Art Foundation now, and the good offices that they have made in bringing extraordinary amalgams of artists whose work speaks well to each other and putting on an exhibition that our official galleries probably would not afford and cannot manage, but where these are being privately funded and available to the public. And so perhaps that is now the beginning of a resurgence of a bigger public-private partnership. And that is certainly something we all need to aspire to try and ensure that the great cultural traditions, and there really are some extraordinary careers in our history, but we need to foster that going forward, and we need to open broader avenues for the next generation coming through now. I think other than that, there are a few maybe more amusing anecdotes which can take a little story moment, but maybe that can come in question time. There have been moments where amid all the seriousness and amid all the cultural richness, there have been hilarities and parties and finding common cause sometimes with people that we were unsure of to begin with. And some of those stories are wonderful, but I think for the meantime, perhaps I should hand over to the next speaker to go through an introduction to their own times and recollections. Thank you, James.
Marvelous, Neil. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure we do want some of those anecdotes coming up in the chat at the end of the session, particularly some of the, I guess, although it was before your time even, I think, the Fook Island parties. We might want to hear about those.
They're a little earlier than me, but I recall some of them.
Before we go on, I want to just take a little moment, because it was remiss of me at the beginning of our session to omit to mention that we are sponsored by iToo Art Insure, who are also sponsoring the entire Turbine Art Fair this year. They have a full specialized art insurance business that deals with everything from museum collections to private collections. They are on our chat window. For those who want to access and find out more, you can click through on the logo that all the attendees tonight should be able to see. I want to move on now to Tamar Mason and Mark Attwood from the Artist Press. Partly this is strategic because our next speaker after that, I'd like to move on to Pat, and there's a bit of a shared history between the three of you and your two organizations, which I'm hoping you'll both chat about from your different points of view. The Artist Press having, at least for part of its history, been resident in the bag factory, so that's a nice confluence. But I'll turn over to Tamar. Tell us the longest running print workshop in the country, if I'm correct, at 30 years old this year. Guys, over to you.
Thanks, James. I think history is kind of like a sort of spirit of shared history. For many years, we did a lot of work for Goodman Gallery, working with Neil.
Doing commercial printing for the sort of commercial printing of posters that subsidize the hand printing. So provided they can come to allow us to get the hand printing to start.
I think our history kicks off where Neil was saying that it was kind of that exciting, hopeful moment in the early 90s where there was this feeling that sort of anything was possible, and there was so much going on. And the bag factory had just opened up, and there was this space that was a kind of collaborative shared space, and all these artists were moving into that space.
But we had also had prior, I mean, we and Bongi at Buddhistrum in the early 80s, 1980s, still workshops. And so those linkages had already
I think it was
made, yeah.
Yeah. I think the whole journey started in 1985.
Yes.
You were still at Broederstroom. And
Yes.
We used to hold workshops there. And if I remember well, Judy was still there.
Yeah.
And Bruce was there.
And
Judith used to babysit for us. And he said, no, go and do artwork and then leave the baby here, you know. And, but I think one of the pivotal moments was that during that short space of time, that is from 85, we had managed to galvanize the bigger ignored part of the artistic practice from within South Africa. That is, it was for the first time that artists from all cardinal points of the country had come together for the purpose of their love, for what they were doing, which is art. And I remember then Bruce had started, I think Marco was still an apprentice there for Bruce.
Yeah.
When you started the first, you know, when you're still doing was it minimum and plates and all that? And then those were sort of, we used to go there and see how, yeah. But I think the loosening of our way of art practice started then. That is then the formatting and the sizes of works and ways of working started loosening because artists had come together and there was sponsorship for art material, and then you could make an artwork whatever size, whatever ambition you wished to want to make it. And then every time post the workshop would have kind of quasi shows. I remember we had one at Rembrandt, you know, when they still had the Rembrandt Foundation at Wits. And then we later had a space which was at Fumba, the basement. And then we used to have some shows there. And then later, the Newtown Gallery opened by Ricky Bennett. And then he took quite a couple of us, that is Sam, David, myself, into his wing, the Jackson Tlongwanis, Kentridge, and all that. And we had one of the biggest shows, you know, around that period of people irrespective of tone or color or anything. And then it was like sort of one of the openings of seeing South Africa through the artistic eye, you know, loosely appreciated by all the people. More so, we had a kind of ready audience across the Market Theatre and all that. And then later, we continued to have workshops all the way. And then in 1990, I think Robert Loader, because of seeing how serious we were taking the project with the vision of David and Bill Ainsley, of course, we decided to get the big factory. Prior to that, I think in 1990, the last workshop we had no money, but the mission was to have a workshop. So what we did, we managed to raise some money through USALEP, and then the money provided money for transport of artists from all regions. And then they came to Johannesburg. And now the problem was, where are they going to sleep? So each one took, a couple into our homes. And then they slept there, and then we had a very successful workshop. And the following year, that's when we moved into the back factory. And it became now the reunion of us and Mark. And then we got the likes of Kendall Gears, Joachim Schoenfeld, Alan Albro, Ezrom Lechaye,
Durant Sihlali.
Durant Sihlali, not forgetting Durant. But those, Debbie Bell, Penny Siopis, there are some that I forget. But there was this very strong core group of artists who we worked with, and I think they, in a way, the confluence really helped in jacking up our way of us.
Losing you a little.
Yeah, the signal's gone a bit there.
The signal.
Yeah,
Is it better?
not so great.
Yeah,
That's better, Pat. Yeah, you froze there for a bit.
Okay, is it okay now?
That's better, yeah.
Yes. And so Mark provided the service of printing, and within it, there was a mentorship sort of program whereby we seeing the proteges now blooming. I mean, you look at Joe, came off your hands, Hedwig Berry, and quite a couple. And intermittently, there's been artists that came in there. I mean, William used to come in there, and then who else? Robert Hodgins. So Makabu Sibidi. Yeah.
So
Yes, there's been lots of people that have been coming there, and then thereby, am I still audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
You can hear me?
No, you've gone now.
Have I gone?
You seem to be back.
Come back. Yeah, I'm back.
Well, let's see.
Yes. But anyway, otherwise, it's yeah.
I think Mark got into the bag factory not being an artist, but by providing a service to artists, and that's kind of been what we've done for the last 30 years. So he had an agreement with Robert Loader that in exchange for using I think you took the biggest space in the bag factory.
The studio that I'm in, the bag factory, was actually meant to be divided up into 3 smaller studios, and managed to look at it before the divisions were put up, and managed to persuade them to give me that one space. It would actually have been 3 studios.
Yes.
Which we stayed in then for the next 13 years.
Yeah.
10
years. So my situation was a little bit different to other artists. I wasn't there as an artist, but a printer, and it was a wonderful space to be in, because being neighbors with all those artists, we could really connect with people. I think I had a table at the front entrance to my studio where I used to pack boxes, and I can remember coming in and saying, "Oh, that table with all its cut lines from an NT cutter would be wonderful. Can I take the top of your table?" And I know you took the top. I couldn't if it ever became an artwork. But I can remember printing it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can remember things like Ezra Machai had the strongest hands of any man I've ever met. They were sort of muscly.
Yeah.
When you took Ezra's hand, it was like just pure muscle. And those hands from sculpting were probably from years and years of heavy sculpture. And all those sort of funny little things were just, it was just so nice.
I remember Ben Art, who had a studio at the Bag Factory as well. He was quite a devout Muslim. And Erica Hibbert was in the studio, and she was introduced to him. And she put out her hand to shake his hand. And I think being a devout Muslim, touched this woman.
Yeah.
So his elbow, which
yeah.
found, I think Erica was quite offended. So there were those moments that I think in the early days we were all getting used to. But I think the thing that sort of highlights for us working with the incredible artists we've worked with over the years, like right at the beginning, like Sam, we've worked with since the start and still continue to work with.
Yeah.
Our highlights are working with artists. Some of our lowlights are also working with artists. I think what Neil was referring to. Should perhaps not be repeated. But it's been a wonderful, journey and privilege to be part of all the linkages between the Bag Factory, between Artist Proof Studios, between Goodman Gallery. I think the artists get shared, work gets shared, sport gets shared, networks are shared. Lashoka trained with us, but then you also did workshops at Artist Proof Studio.
I think being in Johannesburg in the Bag Factory at that time of that first Johannesburg Biennale was quite a highlight. I remember printing an ID document type artwork with Coco Fusco, which was really fun to do. You were do all these sewn things and that final cover that the passbook was meant to have. And I think that was a really exciting time. And I'm sorry that that didn't carry on, because I think it was a really wonderful for arts in South Africa.
And we've been in the fortunate position of never being subsidized by anyone, or so we've had to make the work that we do viable, and which has meant that we've really focus on quality and innovation, and but we've had a fantastic network of clients and galleries, and I think South Africa has a very vibrant print market and collectibles, and I think part of it's got to do with prints being a way of allowing, it's like a gateway drug for people into the art world. It allows them to put their feet in and purchase original artworks without putting a huge investment into it, and to test the waters and see who's worth collecting. And if you have Kentridges from the market, from the gallery on the square in the early 1980s, you would have got them for a steal. They would print, so it allowed people to really start developing their collections, and we've seen that over the last 30 years. Like some of our very beginning, but a lot of the young collectors just starting out, and being involved with has allowed us to access those people and then spread art into corners that we wouldn't necessarily get into that easily. I think there've been amazing. Mark's got some lovely stories about working with Robert and the kind of accidents that happen in the studio.
I remember one with the first set of monoprints that Robert did with us. I think it was once actually published David Crookes. It was Robert had this big green solid background on one of the prints, and it had a really heavy layer of ink on the paper. And when we ran it through the press for the third or fourth time, the print skidded across the bed of the press. And I stopped and raised the pressure, and there was this big smear line across the print, which I thought I had completely destroyed this work that Robert had been working on for like a day and a half. And he said, "No, dear boy, just leave it like that." And several months later, I saw it printed in a catalogue where the big smear line was written about by the curator, where they said it was about the division of society in South Africa, which was line. It was just
it coined Robert's famous saying that it's lovely working with Mark. I delight in the happy accidents.
Yes, no, the accidents. I'm inclined for.
He really did. He really did forgive me for the happy accidents, I think. That was.
Mark, it's so interesting hearing you and Pat talk about some of the people like that. But Robert and David Kolwani very much always spoke about the fact of what you were doing and the expertise that, I mean, you had been trained at places like the Tamar Institute, which was then doing work with people like David Hockney and what have you as well. So they knew they were working with somebody who really had a grasp on what was possible. But even better, it gave what David saw as accessibility, particularly when it was in the bag factory. Many young artists who had never had access to these kind of facilities could suddenly work on decent quality paper. They could have somebody with the skill to help them realize their potential. And for Robert, he said the best part is that I learned not to be so anal, old boy. I could actually say, "Oh, fuck it, I've got that far. I think it could look great. Mark says it could work." And we'd put the plate down, and then we'd have to wait for the happy accident. And mostly happy.
Yeah, you could see him walking there. He was like a little boy running into a toy shop, you know.
Yes, it was lovely.
He just looked very excited. And says, "Hello, my boys." Yeah, you sneak into there.
In the morning with a bag of sticky buns for tea. He loved having
Yes, yeah. Yeah, he was a very interesting guy.
Neil, in the same way, like I remember Mautloa to us, and she published a few editions that he did in the 90s.
Yes.
Sorry, say again. I lost you for a moment.
Linda Givon sent Tommy Mautloa to the studio on several occasions to do quite complex, big color lithographs that were really pushing our skills to the limit of what they were able to do. But it was so nice that in this time when nobody had any money to spend on printing editions, Linda was willing to take the risk and say to an artist, "Go down to the artist press, do an edition, I'll publish it." And it was those kind of brave gestures of support that really kept one's enthusiasm going over all the years, because in the beginning there was no interest or appreciation for what the possibilities of a print were. And
I think for someone like Tommy, being deaf, you had great patience with him, but he was so appreciative and so hungry to learn and make other things, you know. So, and it became the mainstay of his career and being able to earn and look after himself. So it was very important.
And he's after moving out of Joburg, so we left Johannesburg and moved the studio down to just outside White River in Mpumalanga 18, 19 years ago. And Tommy has come down and worked with us down here since then, and it's been on several occasions. Yeah. It's been lovely. Selco made a huge difference to working with him.
And also for communications. I think for Tommy also that was an extension of a way of communication. And I think the idea of prints came in handy because he could communicate with more people, you know, than he could with his language. and with the editions, more people sharing. And the basis of his work was about these stories, and you could hear a joke from the print.
Yes.
And the
that
color.
Yes.
Strong.
And he would show you, he would show you and laugh. And when you look at it and you'll go into stitches.
Yeah.
So I think that's also one of the advantages of print work, because the costs of acquiring an image is spread across a number of people.
Yeah.
You cannot all have like a one big painting and then try to share it together. But with the prints, it's like you have an edition of 20 people are able to share that. And then because of the limitation of the prints, therefore the value of the print stays. And the artist still gets a decent amount. I mean, if you have 10 times 20, you've got a 200 rands, and 200 rands from 10 people, it makes decent money. And that's what one likes about the prints. And I think the job of making prints that you have dedicated yourself to, I think it's a very invaluable service to the artistic industry.
I'd like to say to both you, Pat, and to Mark and Tamar, that you mentioned the workshops, and I think about that time in the 80s. The University Gallery and the Market Gallery were stepping in. But the Pachapamwe workshops and what became, and I think it was a time when the country was looking to feel more liberated and more opportunity being expressed. But certainly the artists found a way to turn that into a wider way of working and accessibility at costs that working with Mark could produce, or doing a show with Fuba, and what your role with Alex Art Center and Bongi's were as well. All of these things flowered at one time. And I think it really shifted the whole groundscape for what was possible for artists, and it certainly opened the doors for many, many more people. So you've all played a great role, I think, in letting people like Tony and Kotsi or Tommy Matswai and some of the young artists who came along and worked with Radar now in her sponsored program. These people would not have had these radical shifts in the basis of producing art in Johannesburg and then spreading it further to the country. It's been very significant times.
And Artist Studio as well. I mean, the role they're playing now is immensely in terms of
absolutely. The Bag Factory gave people a place to come and work where they couldn't afford the facilities. Artist Proof also started in teaching and mentoring facilities. And Kim brought back skills in the way that Mark did from other places and opened doors. And I remember some of the students from Funda back in the day that Durant was trying to help when he was teaching there. They got to make a print and finish an edition for the first time ever, coming to work with Kim or with Mark. That was exciting.
Because from the advent of places like Fuba, you see people like Johannes Pokela coming off, the stable of Fuba and all that. But one other notable thing is that the advent of a place like the Bag Factory helped to open up the chances of travel to many of the artists. And it also helped to connect many spaces within SADC. Because I remember we went to, it was Diana and myself when we started the workshop in Botswana. That was, I think, early 1992. And then as such, Mark also got to work with the Khoisan people who came to work with him, and then later he went there and then did a workshop with them. And then Pachikwame was the precursor where Bill Ainsley and David Kulwan and Helen Sibidi went to Zimbabwe. Unfortunately, when they came back, it was in 1989, yeah, where Bill met this. But subsequent to that, many of the artists have been invited to many parts of the world. And then we have set up spaces at the banner to the first one in India. And then I went with Linda Givon to the first one in Cuba. And subsequently, we went to very, places that the sluice gates for travel around the world and engaging with the people in the field that you love were open. I mean, we went to Uruguay, which is just next door, but we've heard so little about. And we launched a workshop there. So it has been like, and then now at the moment, the idea of workshops has spread right through Africa. And after that, we are now having the world. And because of the Back Factory having been a very successful model and having existed in the time when apartheid was, torturing and all that, and it's showing that irrespective of color, creed, and all that, the profession can be a glue that puts people together because the common purpose is for the beauty of what they love to do and practice. So it's been a phenomenal 30 years. We've been all over 30 years and then linking up, linking up and all that. But I think the rooting of the endeavor is almost cast in stone. And I hope it holds up like that forever. I mean, galleries came into the fray when Linda I remember when Newtown Gallery closed, and then Linda was coming there and say, he used to call me Yebo. And now, Yebo, what's going to happen to you? just leave that thing, and then I'm going to have a show with you. That's when I had, one of the first shows at the Goodman Gallery. And then subsequently, there's been many others and all that. And then later, Sam also joined the stable. And then it was like almost many of the artists in the Back Factory, I mean, the Kendall Gears and the others joined the Goodman Gallery. And then it was like, the Goodman Gallery stable in the Back Factory in a way.
Yeah.
Good.
There's one other connection to the Bag Factory with Goodman Gallery. I remember Linda coming down, Neil, sort of towards the end when I was working with Robert there, and telling us that her father used to own the building. Which I hadn't known. So there's like going back another layer.
Yeah.
Also,
her father, and the funny thing is, Mark, that's why Linda first opened the Cape Town Gallery as well for Goodman. She had been in the business with Goodman Woolman Gallery, a partnership with Alan Woolman, and it lasted a couple of years, and then she was not sure about managing a business that far away at that point. The Speedy Bag Factory, as it was, when they were making all these various leather bags and things, had been part. Her father had a couple of businesses in making things from motor upholstery to various kinds of industrial and other bag materials. And then we did a big exhibition, which Pat and others, a number of the artists you made prints for, called Artery, as in artery in Cape Town. And then that showed it so well at the end of that year, and we worked with a lot of other galleries. And the editor said, "No, come on, come, Neil, we have to find a place, and we have to open a gallery in Cape Town." And then she said to me the next day, "Come and pick me up." And as spread out as Cape Town is, she said, "Come in the morning, and my mum will give us breakfast," which Hetty did. We were staying at her house. I was staying at my parents'. And then she said, "We're going to drive all the way to Woodstock because I saw a name and I'm sure I remember the building, but I have to see it." And as we came along Main Road, she said, "Oh, look at those domed rooftops. That's the Fairweather Textile Building." And it was then called Fairweather House. And she said, "And I asked my mother at breakfast before you arrived, because you were late, of course." And she said, "Yes, your father owned Fairweather Textiles. They manufactured motor car upholstery for him." So before we even went up in this creaky old industrial elevator in a building that, frankly, to me looked like a wreck, she said, "I think I'm going to open a gallery here." And I was, "Are you sure? It's nothing like what you told me you wanted." And we walked into that room with the high beams and those rounded roofs. And this man walked across the road, the way to us, and shook us by the hand and said, "I'm very pleased to meet you, Linda." And she said, "How much is the rental and when can we move in?" And laughing later, she said to me, "Well, I should have found something with a good street space." But it was a sentimental decision. And I couldn't have the bag factory back because all those artists were working there. So at least I could have.
And that story with you said Robert getting nervous when Linda came to.
Robert was never nervous when he worked, but when Linda came to visit, to see what he was doing, he would get nervous. And the only way that you could tell that Robert was nervous was he'd put one hand into his pocket and he'd jingle the coins, and you'd hear chink, 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 and you would know that Robert was feeling a little bit anxious. That was the
coins twinkle.
Actually, she used to like making fun out of people's names. I mean, I went with Linda to New York, not New York, Houston. I was doing partly photography, photo first, and then I was going to exhibit these. When people started doing those braziers in Taban Hall, and I was doing photographs of them in different stages, and I had this installation of smoke billowing right across, but that was light boxes made of that. And then I had a very good installation in Houston. Now, Houston was a very, very funny place because it was almost like Pretoria in the times of apartheid. And Linda was saying said, "Let's go and have dinner." And it was in the evening. And then we went out. I've never seen such tall people, tall with these shoes, a quarter heel with studs at the back and big hats at night. And then I said, I was asking Linda, "Are these acting?" Or he says, "No, darling, these are cowboys." And he said, "Yes, own cows. There are ranches all over here and all that." And he was
big heel boots and Stetsons. Yeah, hilarious.
Guys, sorry if I can interrupt. We are trying to get Nati Similani, who's
now I was so scared. And when I went outside,
Sorry, Patrick, frozen again?
Yeah.
Sorry, if I can just interrupt for a second. We're trying to get Nati Similani online, who is the MD of Artist Proof. Nati, I am struggling to contact you. Do you have any, you can message this if it's not possible to speak, if you have any interactive chat option as an attendee, because the platform only permits 4 presenter modes for registration, which is the issue that we had. So we're trying to get Nati online so that he can talk to the group. Nati, could you give us an indication, please, via text, if you have any chat option on your side, because I can't see one from the control room here. You can just give Nati a second to respond. Okay, nothing as yet. I'd like to just put a couple of questions to the group before we open it up to our attendees. One thing that did strike me when I was writing about the synchronicity of all of these long-lived birthdays this year for all of you, is how much, and Neil has touched on it and others have touched on it in different ways, but how much the organizations you've all run and created and represent have stepped into the breach in South African art history, doing the work that should be done by a custodial public culture, i.e., the governmental departments and the local departments of arts and culture, who are sadly missing in action. And a lot of the private organizations and these studio collectives and the print workshop like the Artist Press and the commercial galleries are having to step in to do that work. Do all of you see that as part of your remit, or do you just take it on organically? How do you see that question?
I think that for us, we just take it on organically, that we love doing the work that we do, and the way that we're going to continue to be able to do that work is by making sure that what we do is of a high quality and is financially viable, so that it can keep the ball rolling. It would be great to get funding to do more adventurous or more sort of wilder projects, but that's not going to happen. So one sort of accepts the limitations of not being able to access any kind of government support, and just we take risks, and we do projects that don't look like they're going to make money, but it's because we've been able to build up enough of a cushion to allow us to do things like that.
I think what I would, if I were to say like there's anything that needs to be done from the institutional side, is that collections need to look more toward what's being done in terms of collecting artwork, and innovative partnerships in terms of museum print studio building collections, because they are very inexpensive ways for institutions to build collections by partnering with a print studio. But on the other hand, in the fields, I think more innovation happens because there are fewer resources, not in spite of it. And I think the fact that when we started the studio, there was absolutely no support at all, was actually a good thing in hindsight. I think I mean, I remember having lunch with Niels Goodman and Alan Croft, trying to persuade Wits to build a publishing wing to the department where they would publish prints for artists. And they kind of just said it wasn't possible, that this isn't going to be something that Wits' art department can do. And in hindsight, I'm really pleased that it wasn't possible because you're able to be small and nimble and respond to things in ways that we can't if you have that kind of institutional baggage is actually a really good thing in terms of innovation. And I think we have to see that as a benefit that we really do have, that more well-supported communities do not have.
Yeah, it's a good point. Good point. Pat, how do you see it from the bag factory's point of view? Or Neil?
Yeah, I would also say that in the strangest of ways, it kind of was inherited into the newer South Africa from the previous, because things like the Johannesburg Art Foundation and Funda, Usalip for that matter, that refers to, and the Federated Union of Black Arts and being associated with the Market and the Market Theatre having a gallery, those were unencumbered politically. They weren't, there was no government funding for them. In fact, if anything, they were being discouraged. But it built a resistance factor and it built a determination by the artists that there would be a visual art response, certainly a performing arts response as well. And I think it almost fostered a sense of community and the need for one another that helped get a lot of what South Africa's culture became off the ground, even back then. And in the strangest of ways now, I think we all accept that there isn't enough money to go around, and there are so many people still living without any real advantage from a newer political dispensation, even now, that real substantial official funding into the arts is going to remain at a really low ebb. But it also hasn't discouraged people. It's made some of the bigger players in cultural worlds, whether they be people making money in music or fashion, what have you, they have become part of a culture of fostering and helping these efforts to see other artists succeed and be part of something. The generosity of people like Bill and his foundation, like Robert Loader for the Bag Factory, and letting and knowing that Mark was going to make such a contribution to this possible new community. These were vital things. They really, and that has continued now. I know that in the last few years, with Lisa owning Goodman Gallery and the newer generation of the Reeds and people in other galleries, and Mona Mokwena coming to a point where, having worked in the Reeds Gallery, building a gallery of his own, we've now started to see small co-ops, little groups of artists who've managed to get access to some of these facilities, but they'll start like, the garage project or a small pop-up somewhere or something that really doesn't rely on big funding, but relies on what Tamar said, innovation, determination. We're going to show something that demonstrates our talent, and it's managed to put life into a community that could very easily have lain back and become moribund. But actually, I'm amazed at the degree of persistence and resilience that is being shown even to this day.
Pat, do you want to contribute here? I think Pat's got a bit of a flaky connection still. I want to ask another couple of things before I do open things up for 15 minutes or so. The
Yeah,
let's-
what I would say is that the
okay. Pat, go ahead. You're back.
can hear you now.
Yeah.
Of
Yes,
all the
sir.
institutions that we are talking about,
Yeah.
they have existence. They have existed out of a need, and the other thing that we really have to broadly is that of we always have people going to college to study art, and post that, what do? Most of them have never had spaces to work from. And from places like the Back Factory, we've always managed to take in, younger artists to come and work with older, other professional artists who are in the career, the fears and expectations of being a full-time artist. Most of us have always, besides having been to, the university colleges and all that, we've always faced that, whereby you are living in a 4-room, and then you wait for people to sleep, and then you start losing the table to draw. And some of them are still facing that kind of situation. Now we're grown up, okay, we've got our own houses and all that. But pre the establishment of the Back Factory, that was always that has always been the case. And places like the Back Factory, and me being happy that there has been young people who have become quite innovative in sort of invading some of the space, all that, at Department of Arts and Culture and all that. But some of the funding doesn't become sustainable. People have got to work and see how they can sort of, improve ways of sustaining those. At times they would maybe club together and actually buy a small building and use it all and take tents. And that is what I've seen many places overseas and groups have been doing. But now also, I think there has been many buildings that are not used in Johannesburg. And artists can be sort of roped in to come and work in those buildings. And then, but the problem is that there's got to be organization, there's got to be responsibility, there's got to be, that kind of thing. So it's a case of people having to grow and take the responsibility in their hands. Maybe hope to become totally independent of funding and all these other things. Nice too.
There's no questions. I just want to address everyone on the session about getting Nati on. The issue is not quite as straightforward as someone dropping off and getting him on, because it's a different registration protocol. And we tested it and it was all fine, but it's not working in the live room. So that's the problem as it stands. Nati, I'm sure you're still out there. profuse apologies that we're unable to get you on to contribute from Artist Proof's point of view. My hands are tied here, basically. I can't. I have no options from where I'm sitting as the moderator. There's just no. There's nothing I can do, essentially, to get you on at this stage. If there are any other questions, though, for our panelists who are on, I'll give everyone a minute or two.
About the story that you were having about the stories about the lowlights,
the lowlight side of the bag. James, in your initial thing, you said we should think about some highlights and lowlights of our experiences, and I have a couple of lowlights of working at the bag factory. One was coming into the studio in the morning and finding fine gritty glass on the desk and wondering what it was from, and then looking around and finding a lead bullet in the corner of the room, and somebody had fired a bullet through the window, and there was a fine steel mesh over the window, and that bullet had somehow gotten through the mesh and ended up inside the office. I think the police had been chasing somebody down through Newtown in the middle of the night.
Didn't you also at Goodman notice that a year or two ago? Neil, do you know about the bullets in your windows?
Oh, yes, I do indeed, because Ken Gears had made this project called Guilty.
Oh,
no, this was.
No, I was picking up some prints from Tinica about 2 years ago, and in your big central window that onto the street there was
the window
around the board, and there were a couple of bullet holes in the glass there that somebody from
the story of where they come from, that somebody took objection to the banners which were about his Fort Klapperkop exhibition, which had a plane circling over the fort. They came and took pot shots at the window. And the funny thing is, because of the scale of them, they had to be tempered glass. And then because of UV, we had double UV cling shield on both sides of the glass. So amazingly, I mean, we got these rather elaborate patterns, which have stayed there almost ever since. Was
that also a happy accident?
But we had to go down into that moat and retrieve, because there indeed were casings. There have been a few. There've been a few moments. I think the lowlights, thankfully, are pretty much outweighed by the highlights. But there have been some extraordinary things.
Yeah.
I didn't know about the Newtown shooting, actually.
And then another low light was just pulling out a drawer of prints from plan that had been in a bottom drawer of a plan chest, to find that a mouse had eaten its way through one corner of a lot of prints to make a little Now we have a climate control, mouse-proof, lizard-proof, humidity-proof, everything storage area for our work. But we learned the hard way.
And one other low point was on Arbor Day, we decided to plant a tree on the pavement of the bag. And
memory of
Ezra.
Yes.
We got a pick and a spade, and we actually cut a hole through the tar. And Sandy Burnett came and scolded us, saying we weren't allowed to just dig through the tar on municipal property. But we had already done it, and we went there and planted that tree. Today, it's a huge tree on the pavement of the factory. So we are quite pleased that we broke the law in what we were doing.
Yeah.
and we planted quite a couple. I mean, it was remember the birth of your son? And then I think the last one was the death of Esrom. And the other one was when we were doing, and the other one we were doing 10 years, you remember? We were celebrating 10 years there. We planted a tree.
And they all seem to be doing fine.
And we got like 3-4 trees around there. And the other problem that we had was that of the poo from the doves, from broken windows.
Oh, in the back, that was terrible. That was, especially
I mean, those doves would sign every painting. And the poo would be so indelible. I mean, you'd prime it and then it would come up. You prime it and then it would come up. And then people had to now try to get slings and get some paper. You know, we get cut-offs from mark to make sort of, from the catapult to chase the birds away. Ultimately, we managed to close up all the windows. And as if that was finished,
we started plant extra trees and not have birds. Huh?
No. The problem with doves, it was there was an old man, Mr. Harry, you remember?
Yeah.
Who used to have a little shop there. And Mr. Harry had this dedication of buying a whole, I don't know how many kgs of bird feed. He wasn't throwing it on their pavement. He was throwing it on the side of our pavement. So we had a whole nation of doves there, you know. And you'd actually sneeze from the feathers, you know. It was,
Yeah, I do have to say, Johannesburg pigeons are not great friends of the arts. We
no
in our current building, and it really we were so amazed. We'd been there since '96, and it was around the time just after Lisa had bought the building, and she was going around saying, "Now look, we need to fix this, and things are looking a bit shabby, and what have you," and we were all looking at this eave over the main entrance and the entrance into the then storerooms and saying, I don't know why, we've painted there and we've straightened it and what have you. But what we didn't know at the time, until the next immense rainstorm, was that a lot of pigeons, but like hundreds, had gotten into the eaves of the roof where they were not only breeding, but had a marvelous guano colony, which was gradually seeping through the eave boards all the time, staining it, warping it, and eventually it suddenly, one day I remember someone looking at it and saying, oh my gosh, look how it's bulging, there must be something up there. And then the next day it poured with rain, and the rain got in because of the bulge now opening, and that was just too much for it. And down came, from what we could gather, probably something like 16 years worth. It was a bit like one of those islands off Namibia. There was enough guano to probably do home fertilizer for our whole suburb. And it meant a real renovation because it splashed up the doors, up the glass, up the walls. The pigeons have waged a relentless battle. They're as resilient as the artists of Joburg, actually. They have come back often, and we keep having to try and put them out.
Fabulous.
Thankfully, nobody was pulling a painting out at the time, because that would have been a dreadful result.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions from our attendees? Give it a minute in case anyone wants to ask something.
Nothing so far from my side.
And maybe, Neil, could you maybe tell us some of those little anecdotes that you were going to store up for the end?
Well, there really were some wonderful things back in the really early days. But I do remember that towards the end of Walter's last show at the gallery, he finally arrived, as I'd kind of been expecting him to, in the Rolls Royce and in his purple robes with fun fur bordering and a plastic crown and what have you. And we had a few people in the gallery, some of whom knew him well enough and sort of ignored him. So then I think he raised his level of talking to Linda at the front desk and saying something about, well, Queen, I don't know. It doesn't look like it's a whole ball of fun here today. And Linda said, well, King, maybe we should open a bottle of something and we'll try and make it more fun. And she went up to an elderly gentleman with a stick and said, after a tray had arrived duly with a bottle of wine and some glasses, and said, would you, I know it's only 3:00 in the afternoon, and she did say his name, would you like a drink? And he said, was you and that drag queen in the corner? I don't think so. Thank you. I said to him, that's not a drag queen, that's Walter Battis. And he said, oh, not just long white hair, but a long white beard too. He still looks like a drag queen. And those sorts of things happened on more occasions than one could possibly remember. I do recall that we had to, when we had the first ever solo Picasso show in South Africa, and I think both of you probably came. I know Bruce printed the catalogue for that show, and we had thousands of people. But after the first week, somebody stole a tiny little bronze by an Israeli artist named Gene Stain off the entrance hall table. And Linda said, well, thank God for the kind of thieves we have out here in the art world. Nobody touched the Picassos, even though there were some pinned drawings, unframed, but they stole this little bronze, which was really not valuable. It was a little head of an animal or something. And it had lived there for a long time, and it used to hold down the visitors' book pages so that they wouldn't flap in the wind. And then she said, and then our insurance came along, because we then had to go back to Jean to say, look, I'm terribly sorry, your sculpture has been stolen. And she said, well, are you going to pay me for it? And we spoke to the insurers, and they then came along, and the broker said, but what are you worrying about this for? You've got a whole exhibition of Picasso, and we didn't even know about it. Your policy is not big enough to cover all this. So we have to have a meeting. So the thing was that we totaled up the value. They said, this is your extra premium, which was rather considerable. And we were still going to send the show to Cape Town to the National Gallery. And they said, no, you've got to cover all of that right now. And Linda said, well, is there some way we can reduce this premium? And they said, yes, get a security guard, which in those days, we'd never had one. Anyway, along he came the next day. We'd called up a company, and they'd installed an alarm or something for us. And he said, these are the ugliest pictures I've ever seen. I'm just going to sit outside on the pavement because nobody is ever going to try and steal them. And that was how it was. He sat outside, the Picassos lived on, nobody tried to steal them and nobody touched them. But thousands and thousands of people saw the show because it was on for 2 months.
Yeah. But you remember the story of Kendall? Yes. When he showed a couple of friends, and the installation was supposed to be that note on the floor, and somebody picked it up, but he had over-insured it. So for the 5 rand, he got lots of money.
Yeah, I think it was a 5 rand note, or an old 5 rand note, but it was a 25,000 rand artwork or something. Yes, Kendall had a few original ideas. Well, many actually at that time, but there were some that were hilarious. And he was that enfant terrible at that stage when he was both showing and then doing some work with the gallery. He and Linda would have fierce arguments, and he said to me one day, you should argue more with Linda. She'll respect you more. And I said, Kendall, she has fired and rehired you 3 times this week. I just can't live with
it. Great, guys. We have one question from the audience, and Tamar and Mark have had a signal drop out, so they have dropped off. They're trying to reconnect. But the question is, what from the Goodman point of view and from the bag factory point of view? And Tamar is about to rejoin, I think. Also from Artists Press point of view, your hopes for the next 20, 30 years. So how do you see the next 20 or 30 years of the South African art world? Neil, let's start with you. Let's go around the room and we can
okay. All right. Well, I think at the moment we're in a really interesting space from our gallery's point of view with this new initiative called South South, and we have formed a kind of loose association with countries from what initially it was to be the global South, and hence the South South, because it was mainly to be the southern hemisphere, and then it became the global South, which seems to include a number of countries either on the equator or north of it, but who still feel much excluded from the Great Western canon. And for so many years and centuries in some ways, the Great Western art historical canon pretty much ignored things like Indian and Chinese art and the arts of Southeast Asia, and many folk art traditions that have been reinvented in the way that Ricky's Tributaries show did for South African art of its time in the 80s. And it's been a very interesting experience. There are, for any of you who want to, you can go to South South as a name and find a web link. There are talks programs, and in particular, it's been interesting for collectors willing to share why they collect certain things and what kind of works they've collected. But in Mexico and Colombia and Bolivia and Indonesia and Malaysia and the Philippines, and the concomitants with a lot of what has happened in our country, that some of these countries we already see, we think we're rolling towards something they were at 10 years ago, and now perhaps over our next 20 to 30 years, we hope we will see more of those links, more opportunities for our artists to be in residencies like the Bag Factory in other countries, and the reciprocity that has developed with that. The Bag Factory has brought really interesting artists from Jamaica and Colombia and Germany to work and make work in South Africa. And I think some of them also made prints with Mark during their time here. We hope that what is happening in the interrelationships between South African organizations that have to continue reinventing themselves and others from that global South, from those countries that are newer to the canon of art history. We hope we will see that continue to develop and really shift the ball game, that for young artists coming in, they can aspire to a career, even if they do not make the top echelon governed by Europe and America, that there will be other opportunities to interweave their careers with the voices of other under-recognized communities around the world.
I think for us, one of the things going forward that we want to try and work on more is looking at the climate crisis and our responsibility as participants in the South African art scene, and our commitment to being financially sustainable, but also being environmentally sustainable, so that trying to integrate our practice sustainably as possible with environmental issues and concerns, and looking at taking the studio completely off the grid, and working. Our commitment has always been to just working with artists in Southern Africa, and part of the reason for that is that's where our strength is in Southern Africa, but it also just environmentally, in terms of the environmental impact, makes the most sense. I think that's something that going forward, all of us are going to have to be looking at very carefully, is the climate crisis and how it affects our markets and what we do and how we do. Yeah.
Sure.
Very much so.
Yeah.
But from Bag Factory point of view?
I think the future looks bright for the fact that we have managed to acquire the bag factory and make it our own. I mean, through the kindness of Robert Loader having kept the agreement of a certain amount of payment, that in lieu of that, then the ownership sort of gets transferred to us. Now, because we have that, we no more. We are now sort of raising money to sustain the place, and we are sprucing it up, and then the sort of the tenants. You know, the age of the tenants has sort of changed. There are more young people. I think we're only two oldest people there at the moment. And the young people have taken the opportunity by the scruff, and the more opportune sort of seeking more opportunities and striving to get things done for themselves. And one of the things was us being able to group together through the kindness of the Durban Art Fair, giving us a space here, and we organizing ourselves as a small group to get a space to show here at the Durban Art Fair. I think that's one of the sign of things to come in the future, and possibly seeing the success of this, the dream can be bigger, to a point that maybe, you know, the bigger art fairs will organize ourselves. And then we had thought of, whenever we do this, there's got to be, whatever money we get from any endeavor, we're going to put it aside instead of buying candy with all of it, in order to fund future projects and ambitions within the group itself.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pat.
Sure.
That really brings us to a conclusion for this session. We've run slightly over time, in fact. So wrapping up, I'd just like to thank everyone, Neil from the Goodman Gallery, Tamar and Mark from Artist Press, and Pat from Bag Factory. Apologies again to Nati in the wings for the technical issue that prevented APS from also contributing to the discussions. But to all our panelists, thank you very much for inaugurating the Talks program at the fair this year so splendidly and so fruitily with your anecdotes. Our next talk will be the only live talk at the Durban Art Fair this year, which is a session called Finance for Hippies, which you can find on the program on the website, the Durban Art Fair website. It goes into how to optimize your returns from search engines and Google Analytics and so on as part of your artistic practice. So it might be a good session for emerging and young artists starting out trying to finance their own stuff. The rest of the program goes forward, and that is all on the website for registration. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending and for participating. And again, to our panelists, thank you all very much for your time and your efforts here tonight. I wish everyone a very good night.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
James.
Good night, all.
Good night. Bye.